Thanks, Angela. It's really nice, and thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to an interesting day and here to learn as well. She bribed me with cake. That's the main reason I'm here. No. I'm just going to take some water. So, my background is in English language, essentially, English for academic purposes, and skills as well. So I'm hoping that I can kind of address those two areas. And in fact, for the last 2 years at Leeds, I have been working with the Skills at Library team, producing workshops and materials for all students. And that's really been an interesting project that's ongoing. I'm just going to move that. Okay, so what I'm going to hope to do today is there will be a bit at the beginning about the theoretical approaches I use, because I think it's really important, certainly in my writing and teaching and pedagogy, it's research informed. So I'd like to just briefly outline some of those. And secondly, share teaching points I use and visual images and ideas that I try and discuss with students, some of which are in my books, as Angela said, this idea about identity and why they're doing what they're doing. And I hope, if it's okay with Angela, that we'll have a bit of time, maybe 5 or 10 minutes even, really just to have sharing ideas or discussions on anything I've said. So I hope we have time for that. I always say I have time and then run out. Okay, so as I said, my background is really applied linguistics. So the main approach that most of us use is systemic functional linguistics, which is basically language is created as a meaning-making system. So it's all about meaning, social context and practice, and that language has evolved to do things, people working together to do things via language. And that was brought into EAP and ESP in the 60s and 70s, together with discourse analysis. I'm sure lots of you know more about some of these things than I do. So looking at spoken and written text and what it's doing. And, of course, genre and genre analysis, that's something I know quite a lot about. And it's something that's been used with students very usefully since the 70s. And, again, it's about how language is used, but particularly in academic work, in different disciplines. What are the conventions? So language used in codified ways. So you might have scientific genres, and it can get very specific, and things are getting even more specific now, which is very useful. So rather than thinking about academic genre in general, it's down to the level of the discipline, even down to the level of your subject lecturer. Each subject lecturer might have different values and beliefs about their subject, and if they're marking your work, they might want something slightly different from somebody else, so it does get very specific. So those are the main approaches and frameworks I use and a lot of EAP practitioners use. And you've got the references all on your reference list, by the way. And these are frameworks that are used to generate pedagogy and used in teaching. But I would just like to briefly mention other things that I've found really inspiring and I use in my teaching and books, which are pedagogy related, but they're not designed as pedagogy, and I think sometimes mistakenly they get appropriated and people think they're teaching concepts when they perhaps are not. The first, I'm sure, again, lots of you know, generally critical theory, and that's looking at the relationships between power and knowledge and how that perpetuates the status quo. So, for example, in universities, the idea is that perhaps the lecturers have a certain way that they think people should be reading and writing, and they're the people that mark your work, they hold the power. But importantly, critical theory is not a pedagogy, it's a critique. So it's saying that, well, in its radical form, that we should change the status quo. So it's a very, to its logical conclusion, a very radical lens rather than something that you would want students to do necessarily. And from that critical discourse analysis, which is very different from discourse analysis, which is looking at text, critical discourse analysis, again, is not a pedagogy, it's a critical lens. So again, the idea that we should be looking at how ideologies are perpetuated in text and perhaps changing those or trying to change those ideologies. So you can see that these aren't things you might use in a lesson, but in the background or when you're having discussions with students or talking about identity and academic identity, I think these are important concepts. You might think, well, you're trying to teach them the rules, but also talking about how they might want to break those rules, perhaps when they become more expert writers. More recently, the last 10 or 20 years, rhetoric and rhetoric studies has inspired me more and more, and it's become more important, particularly in North America and Canada, new rhetoric studies, which basically takes the old ideas of rhetoric from the Greeks, ethos, pathos and logos, so credibility of writing, pathos, appeal, persuasion, and then logos, the logic, the content of what you're saying. It's taken those concepts, and there's a big movement, particularly in Canada and America, about talking about this with students. So in their reading and their writing, what is the author doing in terms of rhetoric? What is the author trying to persuade you of? So again, I think that's an important concept, and it's inspired me in my discussions with students about reading and writing. And more recently, real-world rhetoric, it's moved into the idea again of social change. So looking at rhetoric, the fact that it can be different in all different situations, and the fact that it must involve some real-world social action. And again, that's inspired me with teaching. And with students, it helps students get engaged when they're thinking about perhaps what they're writing or reading has some real-world function, and they might be able to change the world, even in a small way. So I found that quite inspiring and helpful for student engagement. So those are the quick run through the frameworks. And of course, I have to mention the academic literacies framework, which some of you again will have heard about. Since the late 80s, this model came from new literacy studies. So it really came from anthropologists and educationalists in the 60s and 70s who were asked by UNESCO to teach academic literacy to developing countries and developing cultures. And they thought, in a kind of post-colonial way. So Lear and Street developed a model that opposed this idea. And that's where the literacies with the S came in. This is quite a common confusion. So the original academic literacies model, the S does not imply different types of literacy, like genres. It doesn't mean science literacy and social science literacy or psychology literacy. It's meant to reflect the plurality and the fact that there should not be one dominant literacy, one way of writing and reading that's imposed on people. So it's just meant to reflect the pluralism, and again, this idea, it stems really from critical theory. So you can see here, that's why I've described it as an oppositional model, and it's a critique, and the idea is that it critiques the status quo that's inherent in texts. Okay. I've put a couple of references here. Lillis and Scott, 2007, that's on your reference list. That's where they discuss this confusion between literacy and literacies, and the fact that some people now use the term academic literacies to mean different genres. And that's okay, it's just a different use, and people sometimes confuse it. Even some authors, and there's a book called Teaching Academic Literacies, and they're saying that this term has been misappropriated to become a pedagogy. So I think that's quite important, because I hear this term bandied a lot about, both in EAP and skills teams. So that's a useful article, Lillis and Scott, 2007. And so because it's a critique framework rather than a pedagogy, the problem with it has been to try, well, how do we use it in pedagogy? And so more recently, people have tried to do that, and there's a reference there, Lillis et al., in your references 2016, and that's different case studies in which they try to apply this model, try and use it in pedagogy. But if you read this book, you'll see that it's more to do with pedagogy that's been inspired by this critique, because it's not in itself a pedagogy. Okay, so those are the kind of frameworks that inform my teaching. And these are the teaching concepts that I use that have been derived from or inspired by the approaches I've just briefly described. And this is really the focus of my teaching and my discussions with students and my writing as well. So firstly, language as a socially situated practice. It's about doing things in context. And as I said, that can be down to your individual lecturer and discipline. And cultural differences. So when we're dealing with helping students from other countries, non-native speakers, the fact that how academic texts are structured, for example, in their culture, how things are done are different. So it's good to be aware of that and talk about that with students. Very importantly, I don't need to tell you all here, the importance of credibility of sources, and particularly with online sources now, that's a big thing we have to help our students with, isn't it, is what sources are credible and not, and why, and how do you find out whether they're credible, and what does that mean in today's, the way we appropriate knowledge is changing. It's much more fluid now than it used to be. Is it less important, or is it more important now to try and find out what the credibility of your online sources are? The power of argument and persuasion. Again, when students are reading, why are they reading? They're reading to write. What do they want their piece of work to do? What is it trying to do? Usually, hopefully, it's trying to persuade their lecturer of their argument. Understanding the power relationships and rules and how to break them. So again, this is thinking about the status quo and academic literacy. I think it's useful for students to think about that, even if they don't do anything explicit with it. Understanding your disciplinary community and, crucially, seeing yourself as part of it from the very beginning, even from undergraduate level. Okay, you're a novice, but you are in a community, and what does that mean? And why are you part of it? Do you want to become part of it? Sometimes there's a resistance to that. Together it goes with the importance of author identity stance of voice. I'll come back to this. Author identity, as in the author of what they're reading, but thinking of themselves as an author, even in a small way at the beginning. And engaging for real-world action. That comes back to the real-world rhetoric idea, doing something. In summary, they're basically taking ownership of what you read and write, which hopefully it means that you care about what you're reading and writing, and seeing yourself as both a reader and an author. I think that's quite important. That takes time. You might not particularly an author at the beginning. First year undergraduate, you won't necessarily be doing any writing, but it's a gradual process. Oops, sorry. Got rid of that. So I pressed the wrong button. Okay. Some inspiring quotes, which I'll come back to. I think just look at the last one there. You can all have this presentation afterwards, Angela. That's correct, isn't it? So I know there's a lot of stuff to do. This last one, reading and writing is meaningless if it does not have you in it. I think that's quite inspiring. That's from Russell Hunt at a conference. It's not written anywhere, unfortunately. Okay. Just going to keep a track of time. Okay. So moving on to visual images and ideas and things I discuss with students to do with what I've just talked about. Taking ownership of what you read and write. Students often feel like this. We want them to feel a bit more like this. I think some of you know the reference Brewerton 2014. We know that tutors, some of them use reading lists, some don't. Some think reading lists are more important than others. And for me, I'm sure you do as well, try to look at reading lists critically as you would a text, actually kind of read them. So don't just look at them as a blank sheet of paper, but why has the tutor given you a reading list? Is it good? Is it up to date? Are entries on the reading lists repeated? Do you have to read them all? What are the most important ones? Some tutors give a lot of guidance in this, don't they? They give the most recommended reading. Some give a lot less. So I really have sessions with students where we just kind of initially look at the reading lists and talk about it and look at who the authors are. Is there a similarity? What schools are involved? So just kind of take time to read the reading list as a text. And to take ownership of it so that they, as I said, look at it critically and think, yes, I should read this and why, and what should I read first? So they're taking ownership of their choices, and that's engagement right from the beginning. And then, hopefully, when they've made some good choices that they're happy about, and they know why they've made those choices of what to read, when they get to read it again, this idea that they should try and take ownership of what they're reading, rather than letting the sources dictate. I say try and avoid secretary syndrome, and rather make notes rather than take notes. Stuff we all know. So, just thinking. I don't need to tell you critical thinking. Students say, what is critical thinking? I say, it's just thinking. Students get worried by these terms that we use. Oh, my God, critical thinking. And what is critical thinking? My tutor said, it's just thinking, So thinking about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that is, we do it every day, every second. We're being critical, making choices, making judgments. Taking ownership, don't let your sources dictate. And again, this comes through to your finished product. That's what tutors really want to see, and that's the difference between often an average piece and a good piece. Rather than just a description of sources, you've taken control of sources. And students say, where does originality come from? How can I be original? I say being original comes from the beginning. The choices you make, informed choices of your reading, and then what you take. So it starts from the very beginning. And two students will be writing exactly the same essay, even with the same list of sources. But how they've stitched those together and what they've got from each source will be unique. And that is originality. If you think of making a shirt or building your own house, you might both use the same bricks and the same things, but they'll end up with different designs, and that's where your originality can come out. And it starts from the very beginning. So you should be doing more of this, and I talked about giving your sources a job interview. So each source, you read the abstract first and then interview it, like a job. Is it going to do the job you want it to do? What job do you want it to do? That's the first question. What is the job description that you want for that source? Why are you going to read it, in other words? And you might not know exactly how you're going to use it in your essay yet. That will change. But you might have a rough idea. So you should be kind of interviewing your sources. What are its qualifications? Has it got credibility? Has it got the right experience? Will it fit the job description? Will it do, you think, what you want it to do? Okay, I wasn't sure where to put this slide because it can go at all points, as I've already mentioned, engaging your reading. I kept swapping it around. But engaging your brain, thinking, critical thinking. Again, I'm sure we all know these stages. Scaffolding all the time, very important. What do you already know? Linking new information to your old information. And students, often we all know they find reading very hard sometimes. Unfortunately, there's no magic pill. They want one, but there isn't one. But gradually, I tell them it will become easier because every bit of knowledge, at first it's new knowledge, but it will become old knowledge, and then you can latch on more new knowledge and so forth. During and after you've reading, review what you've read, think about it, just thinking, spending time thinking, scaffold again, and locate. I'll come back to that. So what you've read, where does it sit in the field in relation to other things you've read? Okay, yes, and as I said, it does take time and it takes practice. Fortunately, it's quite good. You need to take time to think about things. I think it's important. I teach students who are non-native speakers as well, and second language speakers, and they lack confidence because somehow they think that they are worse than other people, that they're behind, that they should understand everything first time, and that their English language is holding them back. And I think it's important to let them know that that's not true at all. It takes us all time. I have to reread things time and time again. So it's for all students and lecturers and professionals. It always takes time, particularly if you haven't done much reading before you come to university, much extended reading. Your brain is a muscle. We all know that. You know, they're perhaps not used to reading long texts. It takes time to build up your stamina. So bit by bit, reading longer and longer pieces. Start with something easy. Start with Wiki, as long as you don't use it as a source. Wiki's great to get those ideal concepts. I know I use it. So building your reading stamina takes time. And as I said, vocabulary, words will become easier as you read. New becomes old, then you can build up more new language. Same for all of us. You know, when you read something at first, a new area, a new idea, it's quite hard, but then you can soon match up things you've already read. Okay, so I hope you can see briefly the theoretical framework that inform my teaching, then how I actually use them as concepts with students. Okay, I have to. It's a slight aside, but not really. We're here a mixture of skills people and language people and teachers. And I have to make a small plea for the reassertion of the importance of vocabulary as opposed to perhaps reading strategies, which are important. But I've just got 3 questions here. Perhaps I'd like you to think about what you think the answers might be. This is the bit where you can chat to the person next to you if you want, but you don't have to. From the research, what percentage of words in a text or a section do you think students need to know to understand it fully? Is the knowledge of lexical bundles, that means words and phrases, more useful than learning just the words? So is it important to learn the words around it as well? I think you probably can predict the answer to that, but we're not sure. And the last one, is explicit teaching, some vocabulary teaching, useful rather than just the students noticing themselves? So do you just want to have a very quick chat with the person next to you? Have a guess at particularly the first one. Check the time. So roughly what percentage of words do students need to know? 95, 100, 90. So, yeah, why not 100? Yeah. You're pretty right, yeah. About 98%. Yeah. I've got the reference there. This is the finding of a lot of a lot of research. It's quite stable research. There's a huge area of vocabulary acquisition research from 50 years. You probably know some of the references there. Yes, to understand precisely.
Yes.
Yeah, and don't you think that's important in academic texts? Yeah, so, yeah, it is quite a lot. Is knowledge of lexical bundles more useful than learning words in isolation? Well, yes. So it's not just the word, they need to... And again, this is reading, just looking, practising reading, really. You get better at reading by practising reading, don't you? So, yeah, looking at words as they're used in the text. And they're used slightly differently in different disciplines, not always, but slightly. And this is why that chapter on verbs, you know, just really, what are they doing in the text? And this really goes back to systemic functional linguistics. What is the purpose? What are they doing in the text? Is explicit teaching a practice? Yes. Well, oh, sorry, that's the last one. Yes. Now, I know sometimes there isn't time, and it's perhaps not our job, but some explicit noticing and the students going away and looking up, doing a bit of research on key vocabulary, of course, is important. But if you're developing embedded programs in your universities or have them already, some vocabulary teaching, you know, has been proven to be a good thing. Lots of research. And you've got the references there which you can relate when you link up to the presentation slides. So, even more interesting questions. Very quickly, with the person next to you, those two there. What is most useful for understanding texts? What is more useful? Of course, they're all useful. Word knowledge, grammar knowledge. Obviously, those two things cannot really be separated. Lexical grammar. Or strategies such as gist reading and guessing unknown words. I don't know if any of you, if students are trying to read quickly or don't understand words, do you say, oh, don't worry, just guess what it means in context? Which of those is most useful? And secondly, is speed reading helpful to students in understanding academic text? I'm sure we all know. Bit of question. Should I just slow to the answer? You're going to know what I'm going to say, and I think we'd all agree anyway. So, word knowledge, yay. So, again, a lot of research. So, of course, it's a balance, and we're teaching them strategies, of course, or helping them. But it's just a slight plea for me not to, I think in the last, when skills came in, you know, there's been, the balance, I think, has gone slightly wrong. And I think it needs to go a little bit more back to vocabulary and language. I would say that, I'm applied linguists, but there is lots of evidence there. And yeah.
So I think even from an adult literacy point of view, which is my background, vocabulary was always really important at that level of reading as well. So it's always one of the things that you focus on.
It is a balance. Of course, strategies are useful, but all the strategies in the world aren't going to help you if you don't understand the words on the page. I know most of this is common sense, you know. So, but the second one, trying to guess words, and again, this is something I think that EAP practitioners were more guilty of the last 10 years with. Particularly from IELTS, oh yes, guess the word. But there is research that is not a helpful strategy. Not only do they not understand that word properly, they will use their misunderstanding of one word to misunderstand other words in the text. So it's doubly inhibiting. So allow for 1997. Speed reading, I'm sure, no. Of course, they have to be able to read at a certain speed, and I'm sure we all know 200, you all know more than me. But this buzz and kind of trend for speed reading has been proven now, I think, quite solidly to not be useful for academic study, at least, because it might be useful reading a novel, but they have to understand really precisely, don't they, the argument. If they don't get the word no or not, they'll get the meaning 360 degrees wrong, or is it 180 degrees wrong? So yeah, I'm not imagining. So there is, of course, a trade-off between speed and accurate understanding. And there's Rayner, I think, someone I got this reference. I saw this reference in one of your talks as well. So don't spend too much time on reading skills such as gist, skimming, guessing words and speed reading. The main barrier is understanding the words on the page. Of course, this is a gloss, it's a balance, it's just my way of highlighting that we mustn't forget that it's the words on the page which are important. So do focus, and I'm sure you do, on the skills that help students most quickly select the relevant material or bits of it so that they can read that in detail, so that they have the time to read the most important bits in detail, look up the words, understand properly and precisely. So that's, I think, where we can help students the most. And that goes back to, from the start, as I said, looking at your reading list and choosing wisely and thinking about why and interviewing your sources. Okay, so that was a bit of a... So moving on really to the end now, this idea of context, understanding the context and unlocking, understanding the context of your discipline, your tutors and your assignments. We all do this. What is valued in their discipline? That will differ. What do your tutors value and believe? And that can come down. I always say to my tutors, I'm sure you do, ask your tutor. Two tutors in psychology might have different ideas of what discuss means or what a good argument entails. Hopefully not too diverse, but they do. So I always say try and ask the person who's going to mark your assignment, if you can, what do they value in their subject? What do they think is important in their field? It's understanding the context. And very importantly, again, location, getting the wider picture. And they can actually draw a diagram. So if they've read something, where does it sit in their field and how does it relate to the other authors? They have to do this in a literature review. This is what makes a poor as opposed to a good literature review. The ability, the tutor wants to see that you understand where everybody is located in your subject. And then you can understand where you're located, what you're going to talk about. So which authors have similar views, which have different views, which author is way out there and wacky. So the authors, who are they, where are they in the field, what are they doing, why are they doing it, and how are they doing it. So it's coming back to what is the author trying to do. And just to show you, I tell students to Google the author. Again, this is important, that they think of the authors as a real person. There's somebody who has written this piece, and they've written it for a reason. And this goes back to rhetoric and real-world action. And nowadays, there's no excuse not to know who the authors are. And it helps, importantly, fixes you in their mind. And particularly for international students, how do you pronounce their names? Then it gives them the academic capital. If they're in a seminar and they can roll off the names, it helps the tutors believe, or hopefully they do know what they're talking about. Who are the authors? This you'll come across this in the reference list, confusing Aviva Friedman with double E and Professor Anne Friedman with an A. They both write on the same subject, rhetoric. But so Google them. One's from Australia, one's from Canada. They can Google their tutors. What are their tutors' research? So thinking of the authors as real people helps with everything. Helps with engagement, location, and understanding the text. So finally, hopefully they reach this position of thinking of themselves. Where are they located in their subject? So this goes back to where are they in their academic community? So I've got a little, I think of it as a galaxy or a universe. This is their field, different galaxies, universe. And this is your assignment here, so it's a bit small on the slides, so that they can think of themselves in a positive way as part of their academic community and understand where they're located. At the moment, hopefully that will change. It should change as you develop in your field. Your location might change. So it's really this 360-degree thinking of when they read, who are the authors, they're real people, why are they writing, interesting. Then the student writes something, And then the student realises that they are an author, it's their name on the page, and that their tutor is going to be their reader. So it's completing the circle, reader, writer, reader. And that helps them think, again, of how their tutor is going to read their work. So this outside eye. So it's their name on the bottom of the page, they're the author, and the tutor will read their work, hopefully, as they've read other people's work. So it's really embedding themselves in the community. There's a brilliant reference, Sarah Hass, it's on your reference list, 2018. She's done a brilliant, I think, very witty article just last year, and she develops a reader engagement framework. So she talks about helping students think about how their tutor is going to engage with their essay or their assignment, and what's going to make their essay not only interesting, but engrossing. How can it go from average to good? And again, it's getting the students to think of themselves as an author and someone else reading their work. So, full circle, really. This conference is brilliant about reading, but reading, hopefully they're thinking of someone reading their work. And hopefully they might think eventually that their work actually adds to the galaxy, to their universe in their discipline. So it's a positive way of thinking about it. Okay, thank you. I've probably gone on far too long. So, I don't know, Andrew, we've got a few minutes, haven't we? I don't know.
Like to make any comments?
Yeah, comments, add to the pool of knowledge. Yes.
I was interested in your quote from Hunt about reading and writing is meaningless if it doesn't have you in it. And how do you get students to balance the idea of being an objective reviewer if you're looking at other people's research and opinions and yet letting themselves into it?
Yes, this goes back to the question of originality, doesn't it, and student voice.
Yes, and is that how they would let, as Hunt said,
Yes. I think it meant, first of all, when you read, yes, you do have to read objectively, but when he says you're in it, it means engaging with it. So why are you reading it? And no matter how objective you can try to be, critical theory says we always, and reflexivity, you have all your own prejudices and biases, even if you think you don't. And that's important for them to, and if they have to do a reflexive piece, that's what they need to think about. So I think those two things, I think engagement and being aware of where what your frameworks are for reading, and why you're reading it. I mean, hopefully as you're reading something, you're always thinking, aren't you, and relating it to your own ideas. So I think that's what it means by reading. I think the writing speaks for itself. It has to have you in it. And again, this idea of originality, of course, if you're doing higher level work, you can have a real original point, new knowledge, new research. But even at undergraduate level, I think the originality is, as I said, how you're using your sources and stitching them together. And you will create something that's unique, hopefully, from anybody else, even if you're answering exactly the same question. And that's when students say, can I put my opinion in? I say, well, you can, but it's how you've got to prove it first. It's how you've put things together. Yeah.
Can I just make, I do not have any money coming in from Jeanne's books. But I just remembered the thing at the front of your book, the red, blue, black. But it's not red, blue, black in edition 3.
No, it's not as good.
Not enough money for red.
Yes.
Red ink. And both I and my colleagues have used that quite a lot. And students have actually come in with drafts where they've coloured it red, blue or black. So is this my thinking? Is this the author or is this the reference? And that's really quite powerful, and that's a really great example of the different shape of the red, blue, black in different paragraphs, and different things. So
Thank you.
great.
And I think students need, if they really understand a text deeply, when they're reading, they need to understand where the author is doing that as well. When they're reading, which bit of the author, where is the author just quoting other people, which is their opinion, so yes, they need to understand that as well. Yes.
Just a point about originality. I think that's a very strong justification for undergraduate research projects, because they really are original.
Yes, exactly, yes.
And I'm sure more and more, since everything is out there, academics are going to decline and librarians are going to become more important.
Yes.
Librarians and people who teach research.
Yes.
So in the end, maybe 50% more of an undergraduate degree
would be
guided and structured research and writing.
Yeah, that's very good, yeah, thank you. And again, when they're reading academic texts, you can show them that some academic articles are great, but they're not that original, but they're putting together things in a slightly different way, or are they? Some are very poorly written. That's quite empowering to students as well. Students say, oh my goodness, I can't understand this. And you look at it and say, well, it's because it's not written well at all. And explain to them, academics have a job to do, they've got a career, they've got to make things perhaps sometimes very complicated that are not complicated, so, yeah. Well, it's true, isn't it? Yeah. And when you Google, well, I didn't give you an example. My engineering students, this concept of total quality management, value management, incredibly dense article, and the concept is so simple. It's just good management, And when you point it out to them, and then you Google the author, and then you see that they are a consultant. They've started up a company to sell online this. They give consultations on value management. All of this helps students understand, and empowers them and demystifies, that these people are they're people, and they're writing for a particular purpose. Yes.
I've got one comment and a question. The comment is, I think the issue about correct guessing of words is one which is quite a big hump to get over, in the sense that traditional pedagogy is probably, that's a marker of academic quality if you can guess correctly. So I spent part of my doctorate at Oxford, and part of that process was about guessing correctly what people are intending you to take away from something. And it seems to me is that...
Right, that's interesting. I have to talk to you. So that's, what do you mean by that's a sign of academic integrity?
People will purposefully give papers or write material which is, it's not obfuscating, but it's designed to catch you out in a sense.
Yes.
And you demonstrate your quality if you can say, I've understood this without,
Yes, that is a good point. That is a good point. Yeah, I think that's probably when students are at higher levels of study more. But that's a good point.
I was thinking of the article. Angela knows this. An article that was given from the first week of a history module, which was 60 pages long and contained a variety of difficult dictions. I would say is that. Yeah. And so that was.
Yes.
Case of book, I think the tutor who'd set it was essentially saying, this is the mountain you've got to climb.
Yeah, that's true actually. I'm just thinking as you're saying, that's part of, as you progress, as you really become part of your academic community, you should be able to do that more and more. It's part of knowing your subject really well, isn't it? That you can work around that. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a good point. I guess I'm coming from a slightly more basic approach where they literally don't know what the words mean in their own right.
Well, that's my sort of follow-up question, if I'm allowed to.
Yeah, definitely, it's great.
Students and colloquialism.
Yes.
So I've an interesting relationship with colloquialism, which is that I can't decide whether it's lazy or it's their way into a subject which they don't know, and therefore they're using the diction which comes most naturally to them.
Yeah.
Or whether it's something that I learn from. So, for instance, 20 years ago they repeatedly used the word gaming.
Yes.
And I would say in a context which didn't mean betting on horses. And I would say, no, that's not the correct use of the word gaming. Then, of course, I realised that in the world they inhabit, it is the correct use.
It's interesting, yeah.
So
I would say all those three. Colloquialism. I think sometimes it's more acceptable, it depends on your discipline. Some authors, new media studies, they want colloquialism, doesn't it? Depends on your assignment. Sometimes it will be because... probably not so much lazy, because I think if you know what a more academic alternative is, you'll probably use it. I would say, but not necessarily. And language does change all the time, and I'm not a descriptive linguist at all, quite the opposite. And we do have to learn from our students, don't we? And you can tend to fossilise as well. So I think we do have to be open to that, yeah. I look up there's great online dictionaries now of words that are changing. Yeah, and again, not colloquialism so much, but the style in informality. Some tutors like that. It's sometimes more acceptable than others, isn't it? So I always say talk to your tutor. This thing of, can I use I? Or, that's a big thing we all come across. I find tutors, it's not I, it's what students write after I, isn't it? If you say, I have clearly demonstrated from this table that's fine. It's when they write, I think, believe, or I hate, or I like, so, yeah. Yeah, but no, good point, thank you. Yes, I think we're out of time now.
Sorry, we are out of time, but Jeanne is here all day.
Yes.
And you can sit next to her at lunchtime.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, good.
Thank you very much. I love that idea about being read as well as reading.
Yeah.
And it made me feel really warm inside, because I thought, becoming well read.
Yeah.
Is the aim of most academics, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we could use it in both senses. So that's great, really good. Thank you so much, Jeanne. That was really interesting. And you, Song, thanks for the reading list.
Yes, good.
Yes.